Matt Corral out of Ole Miss. 6'2", 212 pounds. He's 23 years old. He'll be 24 in, January. I love, by the way, seeing some of these guys born in the 90s still. It makes me feel not so old. When I see all these guys born in the 2000s, I'm like, I was not born in the 90s, but I was like a grown-ass woman in the 2000s, in the early aughts. Like, I
graduated college in 99, so yeah, I mean, like, it makes me feel old. I get it.
Like, born in the 90s, I can get with, but like, born in the 2000s, Lord. Anyway, Matt Corral was born in SoCal, where I live, in 1999, January 31st. In fact, interesting. So went to Oaks Christian, got into a fight with Wayne Gretzky's son, which I think is one of my favorite fun facts, and then transferred to Long Beach Polytechnic.
Yep.
Eventually ended up, he flirted with USC in Florida for a minute, but he ended up committing to Ole Miss. He was named the Rebel starter in 2019. Hadn't a year, but then when Lane Kiffin came to the Rebels in 2020, it was a match made in college football heaven. I have to say, I mean, that's like Corral just started to blow up. I have a feeling you're going to talk about his maturity, and maybe how he's developed both, on and off the field.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, even in 20 and 21, dude comes to the field looking like he's about to throw hands. Like, I am like, and we know all these players are like ultra competitive, right? We hear that all the time. They're bred for it, right? But like, I imagine that Matt Corral looks exactly the same if he's like drinking on Broadway in Nashville as he does under center.
Yeah. Yeah. He certainly has that personality in his play style that really shows out. And you're right. I mean, when he was in high school, not just the incident there, but there were other bouts. And he talked about when I had a conversation with him, a real long one, in fact, and a real candid one where he said, I had some anger issues. I didn't know where they came from. He had a stable situation at home. It wasn't like that. It was just, he had something brewing inside of him. And I think it does come out in his play. And what he's learned to do. Yeah. He's learned to harness it. Right. And it's like, if I have this, I might as well bring it out when the lights are on, right. When the whistle blows. Sure. So, and not do it as much off the field. I mean, he talked about being depressed and not knowing why and trying to attack his mental health and everything. And so, he's been real upfront with teams on that. And there may be some who are skittish about that or wondering where he is and everything. But I think most feel pretty good about that part of his aspect. And yeah, he's able to, I mean, he and Lane are a perfect match, right? They both got a little bit of a wild side, a dark side to them, but playmaking wise, it was a perfect setup. You go back and look at his 19 stats, Matt Corral's stats, started like half the games, switched with John Reese Plumlee, who ended up getting moved to receiver, was more of an option QB. They would just sort of flip back and forth. Kiffin arrives and, it was, Matt Luke too, and was, a good coach, but I think obviously this kid is really paired up with the right offensive coordinator who knew how to design the plays, throwing the play sheet up halfway when the ball's not even close to the receiver because they know it's open. It works against and for him. And that was the word that I used to describe Matt Corral, which is structure. When he has a structured offense, he's been terrific. When we saw in 2020, when he tried to play a little more YOLO ball, 5 picks, 6 picks, LSU, Arkansas. I mean, it was ugly at times. It was beautiful, and then it was terrible. I do wonder how he's going to play out of structure. And I am concerned that if he goes to a team that has maybe a looser locker room or he gets embroiled in some sort of controversy, maybe it's not the ideal situation for him. But if he's in a place where he's sort of protected, well insulated, he could thrive.
I think that's all along the same point, right? Like that knowing to harness whatever it is inside of him is what keeps him producing positively on the field too, right? Like as you're talking about this, I immediately thought about improvisational ability, right? And I think Malik Willis, who we talked about, probably like one of the best impro QBs in this class, the best impro QB, like his body makes choices before his head can overthink it. And maybe because Corral, as you've mentioned in your conversation, is more self-aware, has had time to reflect. Maybe that big, beautiful brain of his like second guesses things. And so he has trouble just like instinctively
Right.
reacting because in the past when he's done that, it's not turned out well.
Yeah, I think there is sort of a fear factor, and that's good coaching too, right? In the sense that
Mm.
like we can't play that fast and loose. We can't win games when you're throwing 5 picks, and so here's how to have the best of both worlds. I'll be aggressive in my play calling. You just make sure you're making your reads properly, and if number one isn't there, don't go for it. You go to two, then you go to three, and so I think just building some confidence, number one, but also building a good structure for him in terms of progressions and play calling and all that. And him, Lane reminding Corral that he doesn't have to be the hero every week because they have, other playmakers and a good run game too.
Since you talked to him, I'm curious about this. When you had your conversation, did you talk to him about the Sugar Bowl and
Yeah.
maybe how he dealt with that? I mean, like to take the team all the way to the Sugar Bowl and then be carted off the field in the first quarter, it looked a lot worse, right? It ended up being a high ankle sprain. It looked a lot worse when it happened. How he was able to recover that, I think that might be a point of resiliency that, especially in these interviews with coaches, might help him, steady out a bit in his like draft stock.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I first of all, he gets kudos from NFL people for even playing in the game, right? I mean, Kenny Pickett opted out of the bowl game.
Sure.
Other top quarterbacks or other top draft picks have done that in the past. It's not necessarily a negative, but you get some extra credit if you decide to go out there with your teammates. And, when I asked him, I said, was there any regrets? I mean, this injury, like you said, could have been a lot worse. It was scary at the time. And he said, absolutely not. He said, I felt like as a quarterback, like, you had to be out there. That was the deal, right? I mean, I'm the one running the show here. They're counting on me. So I appreciate that aspect. He's super competitive. So, I mean, he said, I was pretty down when I had to come back on the field. He said, I think what his words were is he went into the locker room, got checked out, came back on crutches. He said, it wasn't until I saw the looks of the teammates looking at him that he was like, oh, like that's when it sunk in. So, he's an emotional kid, no doubt about it. And, when he's on, and that had to be pretty deflating. And, he hasn't really been able to do a whole lot since then or whatever too. I mean, obviously the injury's fine now or whatever, but still it was a big blow for him to finish out his college career that way.
Eric, I gotta be honest, like I am feeling, and maybe this isn't the most creative comp, but Baker Mayfield vibes. Like on field, off field, the whole thing.
He's not as thick, right? I mean, but like if you're just getting down to the nitty gritty, like he's not quite as big. He's maybe a little bit taller and a little bit better of an athlete. I don't think his running, like, one of the big things with Baker in college, he could run. I mean, that was a kind of a big deal. Like when he scrambled and picked up 8 or 9 yards, it was like, oh, we got to cover that too. Well, that wasn't really an option in the NFL. Once in a while he could. That got taken away from him. He really wasn't the pure pocket passer that everybody hoped. I think there's definitely some overlap there, right? The fiery temperament. There's the play style. It's kind of similar. Baker played in one of the best, play calling systems in the country as well at Oklahoma. Elite talent all around him. So it's not wild to suggest that. I mean, I absolutely can see that. I went a little deeper than that. Again,
Sure.
probably, this is a refrain here that I've used many times, but I sort of thought, I'm like, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Rich Gannon, just play style wise, right? Now, Rich Gannon was an MVP. I'm not saying I think, Corral's going to get to that level, but pretty nifty athlete, guy who can take off and get some yards that way. He can roll out, expand plays. He's more of a caretaker, though. And that's really where Gannon's career took off, is when John Gruden was calling plays and he had, Jerry Rice and Tim Brown. You put Corral in that situation, and it happened later in his career too. And if you get Corral 3-4 years from now in that type of deal, maybe he struggled a little, but once he gets that same trust he did at Ole Miss, I think he could be a good football player. It just may take a little bit.
Just for reference, Rich Gannon, by the way, started his with his last team, the then Oakland Raiders, the same year, 1999, that this kid was born. That's a deep. That is a deep dive, though. I mean, is there perhaps a more modern comp for our listeners.
Yeah. Any high school kids you want me to bring them out to compare it to? No. Yeah. Baker makes some sense. Zach Wilson, certainly, I mean, body size wise. And
Yeah.
I think with Wilson, though, you felt like he made some mistakes as a creator, as an improviser, but he also had a lot of successes. Now, maybe those successes were having, really talented receivers and things like that, and a great offensive line and everything.
Sure.
So, but yeah, those are the modern day comps.
Well, I think too, Zach Wilson has kind of that uber confident, bordering on arrogant play style. It's
Yeah.
fine to be arrogant if you can pull it off, right?
Yep.
It's only a problem when you can't. So
That's exactly
they have
right.
that in common too. And we're going to close it down with Corral. I just think he's a fascinating study
He
all
is.
around. Since we mentioned maybe needing a coach with structure, do you think he is best suited to land? And do you think he'll find that?
Yeah, great question there. And as you pointed out in a previous podcast, saying that Washington is an ideal spot for anybody is a death knell of sorts, right? You've got to hold your breath and cross your fingers at the same time. But yeah, I do think Scott Turner's offense will have what Turner does really well is cater his system to the talent at hand. I think that's really what his best quality is as a play caller. That's what sort of made me think that. And of course, Wentz is on a short leash, I would imagine. And, they don't really have anybody else in the pipeline other than Taylor Heineke. So, if you're looking to build long-term and you're not immediately trying to throw somebody in the lineup, well, he's the third string quarterback. That's not a bad thing. Learn how to be a pro, learn what it's like to be away from home and all that stuff. And slowly gain over a year or two. I know we're not in a league where quarterbacks develop at that rate anymore, but I suspect that he has a chance in the right situation, and maybe that is Washington, especially if they keep adding it at receiver.
Yeah, and Rivera is one of those coaches that players love to play for. He likes culture. He threw out the foosball tables when he took over the job in Washington. So I do think that he's got a firm but guiding hand.
Yes.
That could be beneficial to Corral's overall development.